5 geopolitical flashpoints that could ignite world conflict. The next world war will begin with a crisis in one of these 5 regions. That's what military strategists worldwide are planning for right now. Their war games consistently identify the same flashpoints we're analyzing today. From the nuclear standoff in Kashmir to the naval confrontations in the South China Sea, these are the pressure points where geography and politics create the conditions for global catastrophe. Each region presents a unique powder keg situation where historical tensions meet modern military capabilities. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these specific regions keep security experts awake at night and how their geographical features make conflict more likely. The ripple effect. How regional conflicts become global crises. Breaking news. Chinese naval forces have exchanged fire with Taiwanese defense vessels in the Taiwan Strait. Military analysts report escalating tensions as both sides mobilize additional assets to the region. The Taiwanese government has ordered the evacuation of offshore islands. Imagine waking up to this news alert on your phone. Before you finished your morning coffee, global markets would already be in freefall. The ripple effect would move faster than the news cycle itself. What begins as a confrontation between 2 militaries quickly transforms into a crisis that touches every corner of the global economy. This is the reality of our interconnected world. A conflict that might once have remained contained to a specific region now sends shockwaves across continents within hours, not days or weeks. Like a stone thrown into a calm pond, the impact radiates outward with increasing consequence. In our hypothetical Taiwan scenario, semiconductor production, the backbone of our digital economy, would grind to a halt almost immediately. Companies like TSMC would implement emergency protocols, suspending operations to protect workers and critical infrastructure. The consequences would cascade through industries with alarming speed. Automobile production lines would shut down first, followed by consumer electronics manufacturers. Medical device companies would face critical component shortages. Military equipment production would be compromised. All of this would happen before any formal declaration of war or major military engagement. Taiwan's strategic significance in the global economy is profound. The island produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the kind that power everything from smartphones to sophisticated military systems. This manufacturing powerhouse represents about 15% of Taiwan's GDP, but its importance to the global economy is incalculable. The concentration of this vital production in one geographically vulnerable location creates what security experts call a single point of failure in the global system. When we examine modern conflicts, we must understand they no longer exist in isolation. The intricate web of global trade means that even relatively small-scale confrontations can trigger worldwide economic disruptions. This economic interdependence is further complicated by complex alliance systems that can rapidly draw multiple nations into what began as a bilateral dispute. The physical geography of conflict zones often predetermines their strategic importance and potential for escalation. This concept of geographical determinism helps explain why certain regions become flashpoints again and again throughout history. Taiwan exemplifies this perfectly, an island positioned just off the coast of a major power, straddling crucial shipping lanes. Its geographical reality makes it simultaneously vulnerable and strategically vital. Other natural flashpoints emerge where geography creates competition for control of key waterways or resources. The South China Sea, with its vital shipping lanes and underwater resources, demonstrates how physical geography shapes political tensions. Similarly, the Kashmir border dispute between nuclear-armed India and Pakistan is exacerbated by the mountainous terrain that controls water resources vital to both nations. History offers sobering examples of how regional conflicts can rapidly transform into global catastrophes. World War I began with what seemed like a localized incident, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Few at the time predicted this would trigger a cascade of alliance activations that would plunge the world into years of devastating warfare. The complex web of security guarantees, once activated, pulled nation after nation into a conflict they had little direct stake in. More recently, the Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrated how quickly a regional security concern could escalate to the brink of nuclear war. What began as a Soviet attempt to establish missile bases in Cuba rapidly evolved into a 13-day standoff that brought humanity closer to nuclear annihilation than at any other point in history. The crisis showed how geographical proximity, strategic assets, and great power competition can create a volatile mix that threatens global stability. Today's flashpoints carry similar risks, but in a more economically interdependent world. The 5 regions will examine directly impact your daily life. From the smartphone in your pocket to the food on your table. The stability of these regions shapes the availability and cost of goods you rely on every day. The Taiwan Strait connects to your life through the semiconductor supply chain that powers virtually every electronic device you own. Kashmir's water resources influence food prices as they determine agricultural output for hundreds of millions of people. The South China Sea's shipping lanes transport goods that stock your local stores. The Baltic region's energy infrastructure affects heating costs and electricity prices across Europe. And Middle Eastern tensions directly impact global oil prices, affecting everything from airfare to plastic production. Understanding these flashpoints is about recognizing how global events will impact your personal financial security, access to goods and services, and even national security. By grasping the interconnected nature of these regions, you gain the ability to anticipate disruptions before they reach your doorstep. This knowledge allows for better personal preparation and more informed civic engagement on foreign policy issues. Think of these 5 regions as pressure gauges for the global system. By monitoring tensions in these areas, you can anticipate economic and security challenges before they fully materialize. This perspective transforms abstract geopolitical concepts into practical knowledge with real-world applications. Our examination of the Taiwan semiconductor ecosystem is just one example of the complex vulnerabilities embedded in our global system. Each region represents a different type of vulnerability: resource competition, territorial disputes, historical grievances, or strategic positioning. Together, they form a comprehensive picture of the fault lines in our interconnected world. What makes these flashpoints particularly concerning is how they interact with each other. A crisis in one region can divert attention and resources from another, creating opportunities for escalation on multiple fronts simultaneously. The interconnected nature of these flashpoints means that understanding each one individually is necessary but insufficient. We must also grasp how they influence each other. Taiwan Strait, the semiconductor powder keg. Geographic constraints shape every flashpoint, but only one region holds the beating heart of our digital world. Imagine if 90% of the world's most advanced technology depended on production facilities sitting directly in the crosshairs of the most dangerous military standoff on the planet. This isn't hypothetical. It's the daily reality in the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan's semiconductor industry functions as the heartbeat of global technology. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors, including 90% of the most advanced chips. These microscopic marvels power everything from consumer electronics to military defense systems. This concentration of critical technology in one small geographic area creates an economic vulnerability unlike anything else in the modern world. The physical geography compounds this vulnerability. Taiwan sits approximately 100 miles, just 160 kilometers, from mainland China across the narrow Taiwan Strait. This proximity places the island within range of conventional military strikes, while making defensive operations challenging. Taiwan's position is especially critical due to its location along essential shipping routes connecting East Asia with global markets. Any disruption in this area would sever one of the world's busiest maritime corridors. Chinese military activity around Taiwan has escalated dramatically in recent years. In February 2025, the People's Liberation Army conducted joint combat readiness drills to the southwest and west of Taiwan, with 22 PLA aircraft crossing the median line in the Taiwan Strait. These activities form part of a pattern of increasing pressure, with fighter jets, warships, and unmanned aerial vehicles participating in demonstrations of force. U.S. military leadership's assessment of these exercises is particularly alarming. Admiral Samuel Papero, commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, evaluated these activities as not exercises. They are rehearsals. This suggests Chinese forces are practicing specific invasion scenarios rather than conducting routine training. The exercises have become so extensive that, according to Papero, they could potentially conceal the early stages of an actual military operation. The political dimensions of this standoff are rooted in competing visions of Taiwan's identity and future. China adheres to the One China policy, viewing Taiwan as a renegade province that must eventually reunite with the mainland. This position stands in direct opposition to Taiwan's democratic self-governance and its population's growing sense of distinct identity. The island functions as an independent democracy with its own elections, currency, and diplomatic relationships, despite limited formal international recognition. This fundamental disagreement creates a persistent source of tension that military posturing continuously exacerbates. China's military exercises and diplomatic pressure aim to convince Taiwan that reunification is inevitable, while Taiwan's democratic institutions reinforce its separate development path. The United States maintains strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan, a deliberately unclear stance on whether American forces would directly intervene if China attempted to take Taiwan by force. This policy aims to deter Chinese aggression while also discouraging Taiwan from taking actions that might provoke conflict, such as formally declaring independence. This ambiguity creates a dangerous space for miscalculation. Chinese leaders must consider the possibility of American intervention without knowing its exact form or threshold. American planners must prepare for scenarios without explicit policy commitments. Taiwanese leaders must make security decisions without complete certainty of external support. Any misreading of intentions by any party could rapidly escalate tensions beyond control. The economic dimensions extend globally. TSMC's fabrication plants produce the semiconductors that power artificial intelligence systems, cloud computing infrastructure, and advanced military equipment, the foundation of modern technological civilization and national security capabilities. The company's customers include virtually every major technology firm in the world, creating a web of dependency that spans continents. A conflict affecting Taiwan would trigger immediate production stoppages. Even without physical damage to manufacturing plants, disruptions to electricity, supply chains, or workforce availability would halt production. The impact would cascade through global supply chains with remarkable speed. First would come immediate production crashes in industries dependent on regular semiconductor shipments. Automotive assembly lines would extend into prolonged closures as stockpiles vanished. Smartphone manufacturers would face impossible component shortages. Medical device production would face critical constraints for everything from diagnostic equipment to implantable devices. The second wave would hit as initial shutdowns triggered broader economic effects. Massive unemployment would spread in manufacturing regions worldwide. Consumer spending would contract as durable goods became unavailable. Financial markets would react to both real economic damage and fear of expanding conflict. The third phase would force painful choices as nations prioritized remaining semiconductor supplies. Military and essential infrastructure needs would compete with consumer and commercial demands. Countries would face pressure to align with either China or the United States, both militarily and economically. Access to remaining technology supplies would become a geopolitical bargaining chip. The shipping disruption component amplifies these problems. The Taiwan Strait is a vital maritime passage connecting supply chains across Asia with markets worldwide. Military activities, blockades, or declared exclusion zones would force vessels to reroute around the Philippines and through more distant waters, adding time, cost, and complexity to global logistics. This combination creates a perfect economic storm. Industries already struggling with component shortages would simultaneously face logistics challenges for whatever alternative supplies remained available. The global economy, optimized for efficiency rather than resilience, would face simultaneous shocks to both production and distribution networks. The economic implications extend into areas most people never connect to semiconductor production. Modern agriculture depends on GPS systems and equipment with embedded chips. Hospitals rely on advanced diagnostic tools with semiconductor-dependent components. Water treatment facilities use digital control systems for ensuring safe drinking water. What makes the Taiwan situation unique among global flashpoints is this combination of irreplaceable economic significance and intense geopolitical confrontation. Taiwan's semiconductor industry creates a vulnerability that extends far beyond the island itself, affecting virtually every person who uses modern technology. Kashmir, where water wars meet nuclear arsenals. If Taiwan's semiconductor foundries represent the brain of our technological civilization, the Kashmir conflict between India and Pakistan threatens something even more fundamental. Water, the very lifeblood of human existence. Here, too, nuclear-armed nations face off over rivers that sustain nearly 1 billion people, creating a flashpoint where resource scarcity intersects with the world's most dangerous nuclear standoff. 3 full-scale wars have erupted between India and Pakistan since their 1947 independence, with Kashmir at the center of each conflict. Both countries now possess substantial nuclear arsenals, transforming what might otherwise be a regional border dispute into a potential global catastrophe. The stakes extend far beyond territorial claims or national pride. They involve the survival of hundreds of millions who depend on water flowing from Kashmir's mountains. Kashmir's geography makes it uniquely valuable. Nestled in the Himalayan and Karakoram mountain ranges, this disputed territory serves as the source region for 6 major rivers of the Indus Basin system. These waterways, the Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej, collectively provide irrigation for vast agricultural lands throughout the Indian subcontinent. Control of these highlands means control of the water tap for downstream populations. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960, has survived over 6 decades despite persistent tensions. This remarkable diplomatic achievement separated water resources from other conflicts by allocating the eastern rivers, Ravi, Sutlej, and Beas, to India, while Pakistan received the western rivers, Jhelum, Chenab, and Industry India agreed to allow waters from the western rivers to flow unimpeded into Pakistan, with limited exceptions. This arrangement gave Pakistan approximately 80% of the total water covered by the treaty. However, this decades-old stability is now crumbling. India has formally served notice to Pakistan seeking to renegotiate the treaty's terms, citing significant shifts in population demographics, environmental challenges, and changing water needs. Meanwhile, Pakistan has raised concerns about India's construction of hydroelectric projects on rivers allocated to Pakistan, arguing these dams violate India's obligation to allow water to flow freely downstream. The impact on daily life is already evident. In Pakistan's Punjab province, farmers like Muhammad Akbar have watched their harvest diminish year after year as water availability becomes unpredictable. My father irrigated twice the land I can manage today, Akbar explains. The canals run dry more often, and when water does come, it's not enough. On the Indian side, in Jammu, agricultural worker Priya Sharma faces similar challenges. We're digging wells deeper every year, but groundwater keeps receding. The changes in river flow have left many fields fallow. Unlike most transboundary water agreements worldwide, the Indus Waters Treaty took the unusual approach of dividing rivers rather than sharing them. It's the only transboundary water treaty on Earth that divides waters and does not share them. This arrangement worked during periods of relative stability, but shows increasing strain as pressures mount. Climate change has emerged as a major accelerant of this conflict. Rapidly melting Himalayan glaciers are altering river flow patterns, while erratic monsoons bring either devastating floods or prolonged droughts. Groundwater depletion further strains available resources. The treaty, designed in the mid-20th century, contains no provisions for sustainability or addressing climate-induced changes to water availability. The historical conflicts between India and Pakistan directly influence current water tensions. Each previous war has left deeper mistrust, making technical cooperation on water management increasingly difficult. After the 1971 war, water negotiations became more politicized, and following the 1999 cargo conflict, joint water management initiatives were suspended entirely. Water has increasingly become a tool of strategic leverage between the nations. Following a 2016 attack on an Indian Army base in Uri, Prime Minister Narendra Modi signaled potential water restrictions against Pakistan, declaring that blood and water cannot flow together during an election rally. After another crisis in 2019, an Indian minister publicly called for suspending water supplies to Pakistan. Pakistan's agricultural system depends almost entirely on these rivers. Approximately 80% of Pakistan's irrigated agriculture, the backbone of its economy, relies on water from the Indus Basin. Any significant reduction in this flow would devastate food production, potentially creating humanitarian disasters and further destabilizing an already fragile state with nuclear capabilities. The conflict takes additional dimensions through religious and cultural divisions. Kashmir's population is predominantly Muslim, while India remains majority Hindu. These identity-based tensions complicate technical solutions to water sharing, especially when water restrictions can be portrayed as targeting specific communities. The militarization of Kashmir reflects how geography shapes conflict, creating one of the world's most heavily militarized regions. What makes Kashmir uniquely dangerous is this combination of water dependency, nuclear capabilities, and nationalist politics. Both countries frame water access as an existential issue for their populations, while simultaneously maintaining nuclear arsenals that could devastate the entire region. The prospect of increasing water conflicts extends far beyond Kashmir. The United Nations estimates that by 2050, approximately 5 billion people could suffer water shortages due to climate change, pollution, and increasing demand. Kashmir represents an early and particularly dangerous example of how water scarcity can inflame existing tensions between nuclear-armed adversaries. Despite these alarming dynamics, diplomatic pathways remain open. Water scarcity could drive cooperation rather than conflict if leaders prioritize mutual survival over competition. Joint water management systems that address climate adaptation, efficient irrigation, and sustainable development might serve both countries better than continued confrontation. South China Sea, the maritime choke point. As resource conflicts intensify across the globe, no disputed territory has more immediate potential to disrupt the world economy than a stretch of ocean where 5 nations face off against China's expanding maritime claims. The South China Sea serves as the nautical crossroads through which 1/3 of international shipping passes each year, valued at over $3 trillion annually. These vital sea lanes function as the arteries of global commerce, connecting Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, facilitating the movement of essential resources and finished goods that stock shelves and power industries worldwide. This maritime region has transformed into one of the world's most volatile flashpoints, as overlapping territorial claims create a complex web of disputes that grow more dangerous each year. China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan all assert sovereignty over portions of these waters, with Beijing's claims being by far the most expansive. The competition centers on control of shipping routes, fishing grounds, and potentially massive underwater energy reserves that could power economies for decades. At the heart of this multi-sided dispute lies China's controversial 9-dash line, a boundary that encompasses roughly 90% of the entire South China Sea. This demarcation, appearing on Chinese maps as 9 dashes forming a loop around most of the waterway, was firmly rejected by an international tribunal. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that China's expansive claims had no legal basis under international maritime law. Beijing ignored the ruling, demonstrating how traditional legal frameworks struggle to constrain great power ambitions in contested spaces. Instead of retreating, China has doubled down by creating facts on the water. Since 2013, Beijing has undertaken massive dredging operations to transform submerged reefs and rocks into artificial islands throughout the contested waters. These manufactured islands now feature ports, military facilities, and airstrips capable of handling bomber aircraft and fighter jets. The military buildup on these artificial outposts represents a significant change in the regional balance of power. Satellite imagery reveals sophisticated radar installations, anti-aircraft weapons, and missile shelters that extend China's defensive perimeter hundreds of miles beyond its mainland shores. These installations function as unsinkable aircraft carriers, providing Beijing with permanent forward bases from which it can project power across the entire South China Sea and monitor all maritime traffic passing through these critical waterways. This military presence directly threatens the free flow of international shipping. Any disruption to these maritime choke points would force vessels to reroute around Indonesia and the Philippines, adding thousands of miles and substantial costs to global shipping. The resulting delays would cascade through just-in-time supply chains, affecting energy markets, manufacturing output, and consumer prices worldwide. Recent confrontations demonstrate how quickly theoretical disputes can escalate to physical altercations. The standoff at 2nd Thomas Shoal exemplifies this dangerous dynamic. The Philippines intentionally grounded a World War II-era vessel, the BRP Sierra Madre, on this shoal to reinforce its territorial claims. Chinese Coast Guard vessels now regularly use water cannons against Philippine ships attempting to resupply their Marines stationed aboard. In June 2024, these confrontations intensified when Chinese sailors armed with axes and knives seized a Filipino boat, physically assaulted Philippine Marines, and destroyed equipment. In another incident, a Filipino Marine had his thumb severed when a Chinese steel-hulled boat rammed his craft while moored alongside the Sierra Madre. December 2024 saw further escalation when China deployed its 12,000-ton Coast Guard vessel 5901, the largest Coast Guard ship in the world, to join its substantial maritime presence. By deploying such overwhelming assets, Beijing signals both its determination to assert control and its capacity to overwhelm smaller navies of regional competitors. The South China Sea contains rich natural resources that further intensify competition. The waters host productive fishing grounds providing essential protein for millions across Southeast Asia. Beneath the seabed lie potentially vast oil and gas reserves that could transform regional economies. These resources, food security, and energy independence create powerful incentives for nations to press their territorial claims despite the risks. The United States has responded by conducting regular freedom of navigation operations, sending warships through waters claimed by China to demonstrate these areas remain international waterways. While effective in demonstrating resolve, these operations create moments of high tension when Chinese vessels shadow or intercept U.S. Navy ships. American involvement extends beyond naval operations. The U.S. Defense Treaty with the Philippines could draw the United States into direct confrontation should China's actions against Philippine vessels cross certain thresholds. This treaty relationship creates a link between localized maritime incidents and potential great power confrontation. Japan has increased its presence by selling military equipment to the Philippines and Vietnam to improve their maritime security capabilities. The Philippines has responded to mounting pressure by strengthening international partnerships, increasing American base access, and expanding joint military exercises to enhance its maritime capabilities. What makes the South China Sea dispute particularly dangerous is its combination of multiple flashpoints in a single volatile region. Economic interests, nationalist sentiments, historical grievances, and great power competition all converge in these contested waters. Unlike land borders that can be clearly demarcated, maritime boundaries remain inherently fluid and contestable, creating persistent ambiguity. Energy supplies face particular vulnerability. Tankers carrying Middle Eastern oil and Qatari natural gas to East Asian economies regularly transit these waters. Any disruption to these energy flows would immediately impact industries and households across the Asia-Pacific region while sending global energy prices soaring. The economic effects would quickly spread to markets and consumers worldwide, demonstrating how regional maritime security vulnerable frontier global economic security in Asia faces maritime threats. Europe's stability hinges on a narrow 60-mile stretch of land that would be the first target in any conflict with Russia. This seemingly unremarkable border region, known as the Suwalki Gap, represents a geographic choke point that could determine whether NATO can defend its most vulnerable members or watch them become isolated and overwhelmed. The security landscape of Northern Europe has undergone a dramatic transformation. Finland's entry into NATO in 2023, followed by Sweden in 2024, has fundamentally altered the Baltic region's strategic balance. What was once a contested maritime zone has effectively become what military analysts now call a NATO lake, with Russia's Baltic coastline reduced to a small fraction of the shoreline. This expansion represents the most significant reconfiguration of the alliance's northeastern frontier since the Cold War's end, creating a united Nordic-Baltic defense perimeter that constrains Russian naval access to the broader Atlantic. Yet despite this strengthened position, NATO's most exposed flank remains the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. These small nations share borders directly with Russia proper and possess minimal strategic depth, meaning an invading force could potentially reach capital cities within hours. This geographical reality creates a defensive nightmare scenario that military planners on both sides understand intimately. Without natural barriers like mountain ranges or wide rivers to slow an advance, these countries would be forced to rely on rapid NATO reinforcement in any serious confrontation. Understanding Russia's perspective provides crucial context. The Kremlin views these former Soviet territories through a historical lens that considers them part of Russia's natural sphere of influence and an essential security buffer zone. This worldview, deeply rooted in experiences stretching back to the Great Northern War, sees NATO's eastward expansion as an existential security threat that has eliminated traditional defensive space. For Russian military strategists, control of what they term the High North represents a fundamental geopolitical imperative, one they believe justifies assertive and even expansionist policies. The Baltic Sea holds particular strategic importance due to the presence of Kaliningrad, Russia's geographically isolated exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania. This territory hosts Russia's Baltic Fleet headquarters and nuclear-capable missiles within striking distance of major European capitals. Kaliningrad's ice-free year-round port provides Russia with guaranteed Baltic maritime access, regardless of seasonal conditions. This combination of military significance and economic necessity makes Kaliningrad a potential flashpoint that could trigger wider regional conflict. The Baltic region, this thin ice upon which European security stands, contains concentrated critical infrastructure supporting European economy and communications. Approximately 2,000 ships traverse these waters daily, handling about 15% of global trade. The seabed contains essential energy networks, offshore wind farms, gas pipelines, and undersea communication cables carrying vital data. This dense network creates perfect targets for disruption through unconventional methods. Russia has already demonstrated willingness to employ hybrid warfare tactics throughout the region, operations that fall below the threshold of conventional military conflict but can severely damage adversaries. These include sophisticated cyber attacks against Estonian government networks, disinformation campaigns targeting Baltic populations, and using migration to create social pressure. Each tactic forms part of a strategy to manufacture what Russian military theorists term controlled chaos, testing NATO responses without triggering Article 5 collective defense provisions. The consequences of these hybrid tactics have already materialized. Undersea cables connecting Germany to Finland and Lithuania to Swedish islands have experienced suspicious damage. The most common method for causing such damage is having a ship drag its anchor along the seabed, providing perfect plausible deniability. This tactic dates back to World War I, when both British and German navies deliberately severed the opposing sides' underwater telegraph lines as priority operations. At the heart of Baltic vulnerability lies the Suwalki Gap, that narrow 60-mile corridor along the Polish-Lithuanian border, providing the only land connection between the Baltic states and the rest of NATO territory. Military analysts consider this corridor a prime target because Russian forces could potentially sever it within hours, isolating Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania from ground reinforcement. With Belarus to the east and Kaliningrad to the west, both hosting Russian forces, the gap represents a strategic choke point that could determine a regional conflict's outcome. NATO's forward presence in the region functions as a tripwire. Following Russia's annexation of Crimea, the alliance established multinational battle groups in each Baltic state, forces designed not to stop a full-scale invasion, but to ensure that any attack would immediately involve multiple NATO members, triggering collective defense. This creates a direct path to potential U.S.-Russia military confrontation that would be difficult to contain once initiated. Beyond conventional military threats, the Baltic region faces cognitive and cyber challenges. As a laboratory for Russian influence operations, these countries regularly experience coordinated disinformation campaigns designed to undermine trust in government institutions, exploiting historical grievances and ethnic Russian populations. These information warfare tactics complement physical threats, creating a multidimensional challenge traditional military deterrence cannot address alone. These hybrid approaches operate in a deliberate gray zone between peace and war. Activities like damaging undersea infrastructure, conducting cyber operations, or manipulating information environments provide Russia with strategic advantages while maintaining deniability. NATO continues determining appropriate responses that demonstrate resolve without escalating toward conventional conflict. For Baltic nations, strengthening resilience against these hybrid threats has become as important as conventional defense preparations. This includes hardening critical infrastructure, improving cybersecurity, countering disinformation, and enhancing intelligence sharing cooperation. The stakes extend far beyond these small nations. A successful Russian operation against a NATO member would fundamentally damage alliance credibility worldwide, potentially encouraging similar actions in other contested regions. Securing NATO's northeastern flank has implications for global security architecture, demonstrating whether mutual defense commitments truly prevent aggressive action or merely provide paper guarantees. Middle East, nuclear ambitions, and proxy battlegrounds. From Europe's fragile borders, we pivot to a region where shadow wars have evolved into direct confrontation. The Middle East presents perhaps an even more volatile equation than any we've previously examined, one where decades of strategic ambiguity have given way to overt military exchanges between Israel and Iran. What makes this flashpoint uniquely dangerous is the combination of nuclear ambition facing existential opposition, with no diplomatic off-ramp in sight. The October 2024 Israeli airstrike that severely damaged Iranian defense capabilities marked a significant escalation, demonstrating Israel's willingness to conduct offensive operations deep within Iranian territory. This was part of an accelerating cycle of attacks and counterattacks throughout 2023 and 2024 that has shattered long-standing red lines. Each exchange raises the threshold for what constitutes an acceptable level of conflict, creating a dangerous spiral of escalation. "I never thought I'd see Israeli jets in our skies," remarked Fariba, a 53-year-old teacher in Tehran, who described how her neighborhood went dark during the strikes. "My grandson asked if we would have to leave our home. What do you tell a child when you don't know the answer yourself?" Iran's geographical position gives it extraordinary leverage over global energy markets. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea, functions as a choke point through which approximately 1/5 of the world's oil supply must pass. This strategic advantage allows Iran to threaten global energy security through relatively limited military actions, affecting economies worldwide and providing Iran with significant geopolitical influence despite its constrained economic position. At the heart of tensions lies Tehran's nuclear program. The collapse of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, from which the United States withdrew in 2018, removed critical constraints on Iran's uranium enrichment and centrifuge development. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported in March 2025 that Iran had accumulated approximately 275 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, technically just below weapons grade, but sufficient for multiple nuclear devices if further enriched. This stockpile represents a critical threshold. Western intelligence agencies assess that Iran could potentially convert this material into enough weapons-grade material for a single bomb in as little as a week, creating an urgent security dilemma for regional powers. This nuclear timeline creates fundamentally different strategic calculations for the United States and Israel. While sharing concern about Iran's nuclear ambitions, the allies diverge significantly in their approach. The United States, under President Trump, has emphasized diplomatic solutions, with the president stating his desire to measure success by the wars we never get into. This preference for negotiation uses military pressure as leverage, exemplified by Trump's warning that failure to reach a deal could result in bombing, the likes of which they have never seen before. Israel, perceiving an existential threat, has adopted a more aggressive posture. Prime Minister Netanyahu has reportedly instructed the Israeli military to prepare for strikes against Iran by mid-2025 if diplomatic efforts fail. The authorization of shipments of 20,000-pound -84 Malawian Kwacha's bunker buster bombs from the United States to Israel signals potential preparation for targeting reinforced nuclear facilities. What makes this confrontation particularly volatile is Iran's network of proxy forces. Hezbollah in Lebanon, with over 150,000 rockets and missiles, can overwhelm Israeli air defenses through sheer volume of fire. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated their ability to target international shipping, while militias in Syria and Iraq provide Tehran with operational reach throughout the Levant. This proxy network creates multiple fronts that would activate simultaneously in any large-scale conflict. The involvement of global powers further complicates the situation. Russia and China have positioned themselves as counterweights to Western influence, holding trilateral talks with Iran. Russia's relationship with Iran has deepened through military cooperation, with Iranian-supplied drones deployed in Ukraine. These relationships mean a regional confrontation could quickly escalate into a multi-power standoff. The United States has attempted to balance deterrence with diplomatic engagement, launching campaigns against Houthi targets while seeking diplomatic pathways. These military actions address immediate security concerns while signaling American willingness to use force when necessary. The deployment of additional U.S. naval assets reinforces this message, creating military leverage intended to strengthen diplomatic efforts. This strategic balancing act carries significant risks. The line between using military pressure as leverage and triggering unintended escalation is dangerously thin. While no party actively seeks all-out war, miscalculation remains a persistent danger, particularly when multiple actors with different threat perceptions interact in an already volatile environment. A direct military confrontation between Israel and Iran would likely unfold across multiple domains simultaneously. Conventional strikes against nuclear facilities, naval operations in the Persian Gulf, activation of proxy forces, and possibly cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. The potential for rapid escalation exists at each of these friction points, with cascading effects that could draw in additional powers. Amid this complex landscape, the fundamental strategic divergence between the United States and Israel persists. Israel views Iran's nuclear program through the lens of existential security, with historical and geographical factors creating a near-zero tolerance for nuclear ambiguity. For Israeli strategists, preventive action, even with significant risks, may appear preferable to accepting a nuclear-capable Iran. The United States, while concerned about non-proliferation goals, must balance multiple regional interests, including the security of military personnel deployed across the Middle East, stability of energy markets, and broader geopolitical competition with Russia and China. This creates a more nuanced approach that emphasizes diplomatic solutions while maintaining military options, a position that can sometimes frustrate Israeli leaders seeking more decisive action. Resource competition, the common thread. While military posturing dominates headlines, a deeper pattern emerges across each flashpoint we've explored. Beyond the power politics and territorial disputes lies a fundamental driver that connects these conflicts: the increasingly desperate competition for critical resources in a world where climate pressures and population growth are transforming abundance into scarcity. The struggle for resources transforms regional tensions into existential contests where compromise becomes increasingly difficult. Resources create a paradoxical dynamic in international relations. They can either facilitate cooperation through mutual dependency or trigger conflict through competition. Climate change acts as a force multiplier in this equation. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and extreme weather events are altering resource availability worldwide. Agricultural yields become less predictable, water sources less reliable, and energy needs more pressing. The collision of increasing resource scarcity with rising demand creates perfect conditions for conflict in regions where tensions already exist, as demonstrated by water riots in Chile in 2019 and resource-driven civil conflicts across the Sahel region. What makes our 5 flashpoints particularly volatile is how each centers around different, yet equally critical resources. These are competitions for the basic materials that sustain economies and populations. In Taiwan, the resource competition centers on intellectual and technological capital. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing dominance represents decades of accumulated expertise, massive capital investment, and specialized manufacturing facilities. This technological resource creates an asymmetric dependency that transforms Taiwan into a strategic prize beyond its physical geography, similar to how rare earth minerals have triggered disputes between China and Japan in the East China Sea. Kashmir's resource value takes a more elemental form as a natural water tower, capturing precipitation and releasing it through the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin. This hydrological system sustains hundreds of millions of people downstream, irrigating agricultural lands that feed massive populations in both India and Pakistan. The mounting pressure on Kashmir's water resources illustrates how climate change destabilizes existing management frameworks. The Indus Waters Treaty has functioned for over 6 decades despite multiple wars, but India's notice to Pakistan seeking renegotiation signals how changing resource realities undermine even long-standing diplomatic structures. Unlike Kashmir's singular focus on water, the South China Sea combines 3 distinct resource values in a single contested geography. Fish stocks providing critical protein for millions, potential energy reserves beneath the seabed, and maritime highways carrying trillions in global trade annually. This multi-layered resource value explains the willingness of regional powers to risk military confrontation. China sees securing these waters as essential for resource security across multiple domains, while smaller nations view yielding control as surrendering their economic futures. The Baltic region shifts our focus from natural to constructed resources, where infrastructure itself becomes contested. The dense network of energy pipelines, electrical connections, and communication cables crisscrossing the Baltic Sea represents strategic assets that create leverage. The deliberate cutting of undersea cables, attributed to Russia in several instances, demonstrates how infrastructure vulnerability becomes a strategic pressure point. Russia's aggressive posture seeks to maintain influence over energy flows and information pathways connecting Europe to Baltic states, infrastructure resources that represent modern levers of power. The Middle East completes our resource spectrum with its oil reserves and strategic transportation routes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Approximately 20% of global oil supply passes through this narrow waterway, creating extraordinary leverage in international relations. The 1973 oil embargo demonstrated how resource control could reshape global politics more effectively than military action. The Iranian-Israeli confrontation unfolds against this backdrop where control over energy resources shapes how outside powers engage with the conflict. Resource competitions become particularly dangerous as they adopt zero-sum characteristics. As resources become more constrained, the perception that one nation's gain must come at another's expense intensifies. The 2008 food price crisis triggered riots across 40 countries, illustrating how resource constraints propagate instability globally. Climate pressures shrink the available resource pool, while population growth increases demand, creating conditions where compromise seems increasingly irrational. Yet paradoxically, resource interdependence can create powerful incentives for cooperation. Despite hostile relations, the Indus Waters Treaty maintained water-sharing arrangements for decades because both nations recognized that cooperative management served their interests better than conflict. Similarly, the Mekong River Commission has facilitated water cooperation among Southeast Asian states despite significant tensions. This pattern appears across other resource domains as well. International fishing agreements have sometimes succeeded in managing marine resources cooperatively, even among nations with significant tensions. Energy infrastructure has occasionally created interdependencies that foster stability rather than conflict. The challenge lies in designing resource management frameworks that acknowledge scarcity while still promoting mutual benefit, a task that grows more difficult as climate change intensifies. The resource lens also helps explain why certain flashpoints receive more international attention than others. Conflicts that threaten globally significant resources draw in outside powers more readily than localized disputes. This creates complex webs of involvement that can either stabilize conflicts through shared interest in resource access or escalate them through competitive resource acquisition. Taiwan's semiconductor prowess and Middle Eastern oil have global implications that localized water disputes may not, despite their regional importance. Diplomatic solutions. Learning from history. Here's a paradox worth examining. In an era defined by rising geopolitical tensions, nuclear proliferation, and resource competition, major power wars have actually decreased dramatically since World War II. This counterintuitive trend challenges our assumptions about global conflict patterns and highlights the critical importance of diplomatic frameworks in preventing international crises from escalating into full-scale war. This success story of conflict prevention often goes untold precisely because it's about what didn't happen. For every flashpoint that erupts into violence, several others are quietly diffused through diplomatic channels far from public view. The prevention of major conflicts deserves as much attention as the potential flashpoints themselves, as these diplomatic achievements provide valuable templates for addressing today's most dangerous geopolitical standoffs. The mechanisms that have successfully prevented great power conflicts are increasingly under strain. International institutions designed as guardrails against global conflict, the United Nations, arms control treaties, multilateral diplomatic forums, have weakened considerably in recent decades. This institutional erosion comes precisely when rising tensions across our 5 flashpoints demand more robust diplomatic architecture, not less. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 demonstrates diplomatic success under extreme pressure. Nuclear-armed superpowers on the brink of catastrophic conflict found pathways to de-escalation through back-channel communications. The Soviets removed missiles from Cuba, while the United States withdrew Jupiter missiles from Turkey and promised not to invade Cuba. This crisis resolution shows how even perilous confrontations between nuclear powers can be managed through direct communication, strategic concessions, and recognizing shared survival interests. Could similar back-channel negotiations work for today's nuclear flashpoints? Similarly, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 diffused territorial competition over a resource-rich region. 12 nations, including the United States and Soviet Union, demilitarized an entire continent, establishing Antarctica exclusively for peaceful scientific research. The treaty transformed competition into cooperation by focusing on shared scientific endeavors. Nations with competing claims found common ground through collaborative projects, creating mutual benefits that outweighed unilateral resource exploitation. This template of demilitarization, coupled with cooperative ventures, offers practical applications for addressing resource-based conflicts like those in the South China Sea. What would a South China Sea scientific cooperation zone look like in practice? Water resource disputes threaten regions like Kashmir, but have been successfully managed elsewhere. The Mekong River Commission, established in 1995, facilitates transboundary water management among Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. Despite differences in economic development, political systems, and historical tensions, these nations maintain functional cooperation through data sharing, joint projects, and dispute resolution mechanisms. The Commission creates mutual benefits through equitable resource management rather than zero-sum competition. This framework could address similar challenges in the Indus Basin, where water scarcity drives India-Pakistan tensions. For maritime disputes, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS establishes comprehensive legal frameworks for resolving competing claims. Adopted in 1982, UNCLOS defines territorial waters and provides mechanisms for dispute resolution, including arbitration through the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. Despite challenges, notably China's rejection of the Permanent Court of Arbitration's ruling regarding its claims, the convention offers structured pathways for managing competing maritime interests through international law. These diplomatic successes share common elements that make them effective in preventing conflicts. Each acknowledges legitimate security concerns of all parties rather than dismissing them. The Cuban Missile Crisis resolution addressed both American fears about missiles near U.S. shores and Soviet concerns about military encirclement. The Antarctic Treaty recognized all parties' interests while preventing military dominance by any single nation. Successful diplomatic frameworks create tangible economic benefits for all participants. The Mekong River Commission facilitates cooperative water management that enhances agricultural productivity and hydropower generation for all member states. This transforms potential resource competitions into arrangements where cooperation yields greater benefits than conflict. Equally important are verification mechanisms that build trust among potential adversaries. The Antarctic Treaty pioneered an inspection system allowing any member nation to observe others' activities, creating transparency that reinforced compliance. Arms control agreements between nuclear powers similarly rely on verification protocols to ensure all parties fulfill commitments, reducing uncertainty that drives security dilemmas. These diplomatic solutions require leadership willing to prioritize long-term stability over short-term advantages. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, both Kennedy and Khrushchev recognized escalation dangers and made difficult concessions rather than pursuing maximalist positions. Similar courage is needed from leaders facing tensions in the Taiwan Strait or Kashmir, where compromise may be politically challenging but essential for preventing catastrophic conflicts. The diplomatic tools that successfully prevented major wars remain available today. What's often lacking is not technical mechanisms, but political will to employ them. International institutions exist to facilitate water-sharing arrangements in disputed watersheds. Legal frameworks offer pathways for resolving maritime boundary disputes. Arms control templates provide models for managing nuclear tensions. The critical question is whether today's leaders will use these diplomatic tools before crises escalate beyond peaceful resolution. None of this suggests that diplomacy is easy or solutions to complex geopolitical challenges readily available. Each flashpoint involves deeply entrenched positions, national pride, and threats to critical interests that make compromise difficult. However, historical examples demonstrate that even the most intractable conflicts can be managed through frameworks that acknowledge security concerns, create mutual global benefits, supply chains, and establish trust-building mechanisms. The diplomatic frameworks that prevent direct conflict between nations have undoubtedly played a crucial role in maintaining relative peace between major powers. But there's an equally important vulnerability that exists beneath the surface of our global stability. One that doesn't require military confrontation to trigger widespread disruption. Look at the smartphone in your pocket. That single device represents an unprecedented level of global interdependence, with materials and components sourced from over 40 different countries before reaching your hand. This intricate web of suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors forms a system that connects our modern world in ways previous generations could never have imagined. This level of interconnection has transformed how we understand national security. While traditional military deterrence remains important, our economic security now depends on fragile supply networks that span oceans, cross contentious borders, and rely on cooperation between potential adversaries. These networks were built for efficiency, not geopolitical resilience. Modern manufacturing has embraced just-in-time production systems. Rather than maintaining large inventories of parts and materials, companies receive components precisely when needed, minimizing storage costs and maximizing production efficiency. Toyota pioneered this approach decades ago, and it's since been adopted across virtually every industry. While financially sound during peacetime, this system creates a dangerous vulnerability during conflict. There are simply no buffer stocks to absorb disruptions. Like a finely tuned watch where one missing gear halts the entire mechanism, our global supply chain can be paralyzed by disruption at a single critical point. The optimization of global supply chains for cost and speed has created another critical weakness: concentration of production. Instead of manufacturing components in multiple locations as a safeguard, production has consolidated in specific regions where it's most cost-effective. Taiwan's dominance in semiconductor manufacturing exemplifies this vulnerability, but similar concentrations exist worldwide. Consider what would happen if conflict erupted in the Taiwan Strait. Beyond the immediate military consequences, the disruption to electronics manufacturing would cascade through nearly every sector of the global economy. Medical devices, automobile production, and consumer electronics would face critical component shortages. What makes this situation particularly concerning is that the semiconductor supply chain cannot be quickly relocated. Taiwan's manufacturing dominance represents decades of accumulated expertise, massive capital investment, and specialized infrastructure that would take years to rebuild elsewhere. The South China Sea presents another serious risk. As a vital maritime corridor, handling a third of global shipping traffic valued at over $3 trillion annually. Any disruption here would immediately create energy shortages and manufacturing bottlenecks across multiple continents. Without inventory buffers, production lines worldwide would quickly exhaust their material supplies. Alternative shipping routes exist, but they would add thousands of miles, significant costs, and weeks of delay to shipping schedules. A Middle East conflict would immediately impact energy markets. With 20% of the world's oil supply passing through the Strait of Hormuz, any disruption would cause price spikes, leading to inflation and economic contraction. Oil is the foundation of countless products from pharmaceuticals to plastics, making production and transportation more expensive across all industries. The Baltic Sea region represents a different vulnerability with its critical energy infrastructure and data connections. Offshore wind farms, natural gas pipelines, and undersea communication cables all converge in this relatively small maritime area. Recent incidents of damaged undersea cables highlight this risk. Modern logistics systems depend on constant communication to coordinate shipments, track inventory, and manage deliveries. Without these connections, even physically intact supply chains would struggle to function. We've already experienced previews of this fragility. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered supply chain disruptions still felt years later. The Suez Canal blockage in 2021, caused by a single stuck container ship, created global shipping delays and cost billions in economic damage. These were isolated incidents with limited duration. Now imagine the compounding effects if multiple conflicts erupted simultaneously. The global supply chain has limited redundancy and resilience. If alternative suppliers and shipping routes were already overwhelmed by one regional disruption, additional disruptions would create cascading failures throughout the system. Critical materials would become unavailable at any price, creating worldwide shortages. Industries would face shutting down or continuing limited operations at massively increased costs. These effects would propagate through the economy, potentially triggering a severe global economic contraction. The impact extends beyond commercial goods. Food security could be threatened as agricultural systems depend on global supply chains for fertilizer to equipment parts. Healthcare systems rely on steady supplies of medicines and equipment from multiple continents. Essential infrastructure requires regular maintenance with globally sourced parts. What makes these vulnerabilities particularly concerning is their delayed visibility. Unlike military conflicts with immediate consequences, supply chain disruptions emerge gradually, building in severity as inventories deplete and alternatives exhaust. By the time the full impact becomes apparent, the damage may already be substantial and difficult to reverse. Our global supply chain resembles a house of cards, impressive in its complexity but vulnerable to collapse from disruption at critical points. Understanding these vulnerabilities is essential as we navigate an increasingly uncertain geopolitical landscape. Personal preparation, from knowledge to action. The gradual nature of supply chain collapse makes prevention infinitely more valuable than reaction. And this is where ordinary citizens wield surprising power. Beyond government officials and military strategists, everyday people play an underestimated role in preventing these powder kegs from exploding through a concept rarely discussed: geopolitical literacy. Understanding global flashpoints represents practical knowledge that empowers individuals to recognize warning signs and advocate for diplomatic solutions before conflicts escalate. In our interconnected world, where tensions in one region can trigger worldwide consequences, this understanding becomes essential for navigating an increasingly complex international landscape. Geopolitical literacy involves analyzing how geography, resources, and political ambitions interact to create potential conflict zones. This framework allows you to interpret international events more accurately and understand their potential impact on your daily life. By developing this skill, you become a more informed global citizen, better equipped to engage meaningfully with international affairs rather than merely reacting to headlines. Unfortunately, mainstream media coverage often transforms nuanced regional conflicts into simplistic narratives. Complex disputes with centuries of historical context get reduced to good versus evil storylines that obscure fundamental drivers of conflict. This simplification creates obstacles to public understanding and makes diplomatic solutions more difficult to identify and support. Consider how reporting on Kashmir often focuses exclusively on religious tensions while underplaying the crucial water resource competition. Or how South China Sea coverage emphasizes military confrontations without adequate explanation of the economic stakes for all nations involved. These simplified narratives deny viewers the context needed to fully comprehend these situations. Breaking free from this limited perspective requires diversifying your information sources. Seek out specialized publications, academic journals, and expert analyses that provide deeper context than traditional news outlets. International policy institutes like the Council on Foreign Relations or the International Crisis Group offer detailed reports on regional tensions. Foreign policy podcasts featuring actual diplomats and regional experts can provide nuanced perspectives rarely found in headlines. When consuming news about international events, compare coverage across multiple sources, including those from different countries involved in the dispute. This cross-referencing helps identify bias and provides a more complete picture of complex situations. The goal is to understand the competing narratives and interests that shape these conflicts. Your economic choices also play a meaningful role in addressing global vulnerabilities. Supporting supply chain diversity through your purchasing decisions drives corporate behavior collectively. Favor companies that maintain diverse sourcing strategies rather than depending entirely on single regions for critical components or materials. As Maria, a software engineer from Portland, discovered, after learning about semiconductor supply vulnerabilities, I researched which electronics companies had diversified manufacturing. My small purchasing decisions may seem insignificant, but multiplied across millions of consumers, they signal market demand for resilience. Active participation in democratic processes allows citizens to influence foreign policy direction. This extends beyond voting for candidates who prioritize diplomatic solutions. It involves communicating with elected officials about international issues, supporting organizations that promote peaceful conflict resolution, and engaging in community discussions about foreign policy priorities. When citizens demonstrate informed concern about potential conflicts, policymakers must respond. Public pressure has historically been effective in pushing governments toward diplomatic engagement rather than military confrontation. Your voice, amplified by others who share your concerns, creates meaningful incentives for leaders to pursue peaceful solutions to international tensions. Household preparation directly translates geopolitical awareness into practical action. Rather than promoting fear, take reasonable steps to increase resilience to temporary disruptions. Build a 2-week emergency supply of essential medications, food, and water. Create a family communication plan for disruptions. Identify reliable information sources for emergencies. Diversify your own supply sources for critical needs. These measures aren't acts of paranoia, but responsible preparation, similar to having insurance or saving for emergencies. By taking these steps calmly and rationally, you protect yourself while contributing to community resilience. The collective awareness of informed citizens creates powerful pressure for diplomatic solutions. When populations understand the real costs and consequences of conflict, they're more likely to support leaders who pursue diplomatic engagement. This awareness serves as a counterweight to simplified narratives that can make military solutions seem more appealing than they actually are. David, a high school teacher in Michigan, transformed his classroom by incorporating geopolitical literacy. When the Ukraine crisis began, my students moved beyond headline reactions to understanding energy dependencies, historical context, and diplomatic alternatives. Several went on to organize community forums explaining these complexities to their parents. Historical evidence demonstrates that public opinion influences conflict outcomes. During the Cold War, growing public concern about nuclear weapons contributed significantly to arms control agreements. More recently, international campaigns against landmines and cluster munitions succeeded in part because informed citizens worldwide demanded action. Your understanding of global flashpoints contributes to this collective pressure for peace. Take these concrete actions today. 1. Expand your geopolitical literacy through weekly engagement with quality international analysis. 2. Study one flashpoint monthly, examining perspectives from multiple sides. 3. Join discussion groups where international issues are examined thoughtfully. 4. Evaluate your household's vulnerability and implement resilience measures. 5. Research candidates' positions on international cooperation and conflict resolution. 6. Contact representatives about specific issues of concern. 7. Support organizations working toward diplomatic solutions. The understanding you've gained through this exploration of global flashpoints represents practical knowledge that empowers you to contribute to a more stable world. By recognizing warning signs, supporting diplomatic initiatives, and preparing reasonably for potential disruptions, you become part of the solution rather than a passive observer. Throughout our exploration of these 5 flashpoints, we've seen how regional tensions can rapidly escalate into global crises. These represent critical choices about our collective future. Diplomatic approaches prove invaluable when contrasted with the alternatives. Economic and human costs of major conflicts substantially outweigh investments in peaceful solutions. By understanding these complex geopolitical relationships, we gain the power to advocate for diplomacy before crisis points. What role will you play in promoting peaceful solutions? The time for awareness and preparation is now. Remember, these flashpoints aren't distant concerns, but interconnected challenges that affect us all. Your engagement matters in shaping our global future.